Ever feel like you change more than your memories do?
Yeah.
Today we're going deep on that, on the nature of memory itself.
Okay.
With Michael Levin's paper, Self-Improvising Memory,
Right.
we'll be exploring how our brains
Yeah.
and even our bodies might be constantly rewriting and reinterpreting the past and what that means for who we are right now.
Yeah. What's really intriguing about Levin's perspective is that he challenges that classic view of memory as a static storage system.
Okay.
It's less like a filing cabinet
Okay.
and more like constantly evolving software, you know?
Okay, so less perfect recall and more like a best hits remix
Yeah, exactly.
of our experiences tailored for the present.
Right, right.
But doesn't that bring up a paradox?
Yeah.
Like, we need to change to learn and grow. But if our past selves are always being rewritten,
Right.
then who are we, really?
That's where Levin's argument gets really interesting, I think. He suggests evolution has already tackled this kind of dilemma for us by prioritizing the gist over those nitty-gritty details.
So it's not about remembering every leaf a caterpillar ate.
Right.
It's about the butterfly knowing what's poisonous now.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of it like this.
Okay.
For living organisms, what matters most is maintaining a coherent self-narrative, a story that helps us function in the present moment.
So you're saying even our mistakes in memory, those times we swear we remember something exactly as it happened.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe we didn't. Even those serve a purpose.
Precisely, yeah. Take confabulation, for example. On the surface, it seems like a flaw.
Okay.
Our brains filling in gaps, even like inventing details. But it might actually be a feature, a way to maintain that consistent self-narrative.
That reminds me of those studies with split brain patients.
Right.
Their left hand, controlled by the right side of the brain, will do something.
Right.
And their verbal left brain, totally unaware, just makes up an explanation.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that explanation, it's not about being right.
Yeah.
It's about the brain striving for a story that makes sense.
Exactly.
Even if it means bending the truth a little.
Yeah.
So if our memories aren't these perfect recordings, more like interpretations constantly molded by our current selves, what exactly are memories then?
Well, Levin uses this compelling analogy. He compares memories to messages passed between what he calls self-flits.
Self-flits?
Yeah, think of self-flits as those fleeting moments of consciousness that kind of make up our experience. Each self-flit has its own perspective, its own kind of snapshot of reality.
Okay, so I'm picturing this whole chain of these self-flits.
Yeah.
Like little mini-me's, each experiencing a moment in time.
Right.
And the memories are the messages that they pass down the line.
And just like a good game of telephone, that message can change a bit each time it's relayed.
Yeah.
Each self-flit interprets and reinterprets those messages through the lens of their current experiences, their goals, even their physical body at that moment.
Hold on, their body.
Yeah. You're saying how we remember things can be influenced by our physical selves.
Yeah, why?
How does that even work?
Let's consider the incredible case of caterpillars and butterflies.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
We have these caterpillars living their best lives.
Right.
Munching on leaves. They learn things through experience, right?
Right.
Like avoiding that one leaf that made them sick.
Exactly. And then metamorphosis happens.
Yeah.
The caterpillar essentially like liquefies.
It's wild.
And out of that emerges this butterfly.
Right.
Completely different body,
Totally.
different needs, different world.
Yeah.
And yet somehow certain memories make it through.
But here's the mind-blowing part.
Right.
The butterfly isn't remembering the specifics of being a caterpillar, right?
Yeah. It's not like, oh, that leaf over there, that was the bad one.
Right.
It's more like the memory has been translated somehow, made relevant to the butterfly's new reality.
Exactly. The specific what of the memory that might blur, but that underlying why, that survival instinct that gets carried forward. Maybe the caterpillar learned to avoid a specific leaf shape, but the butterfly inherits a general aversion to certain colors or patterns that signal danger. That lesson adapts to the new life stage.
So the memory itself goes through a kind of metamorphosis too.
I like that.
It gets like distilled down to its essence.
That's how Levin explains it, using a concept called bow tie architecture.
Right.
Imagine a bow tie.
Okay.
Wide at the top, narrowing to a pinch in the middle,
Okay.
then expanding wide again at the bottom.
Okay, I can visualize that.
Yeah.
So the wide parts of the bow tie, those are the complex details. Like a caterpillar's like vivid sensory experience of that one nasty leaf.
And the narrow middle.
Yeah.
That's where all that complexity gets squeezed down to its core message. Maybe something like certain visual cues equal danger.
Right.
Then, when the butterfly needs to access that knowledge, the information expands back out.
Okay.
But it's not the original memory anymore. It's been filtered, run through the lens of the butterfly's current needs and context.
This bow tie idea is fascinating. But is this just a biological quirk?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about a fundamental principle here?
What's even more fascinating is that we see this bow tie architecture everywhere in biology. And beyond. It's not just about memories. Think about development, for example.
You mean like how a single fertilized egg,
Yeah.
packed with information, somehow unfolds into a complex organism?
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be peak information decompression, right?
Absolutely. Or think about regeneration.
Okay.
Some creatures, like salamanders.
Those guys can regrow entire limbs.
Right.
It's insane.
And they've even done experiments where they transplant a salamander's tail
What?
to a different part of its body.
Wow.
And guess what?
What?
The cells in that tail start to transform based on their new location.
Get out.
It's like they're reinterpreting their own internal memories of what it means to be a tail versus a leg, adapting to the context.
Okay, so we've got development, regeneration, and of course, the way our own brains are constantly trying to make sense of experiences, pull out the important stuff. It's like Levin's saying, it's bow ties all the way down.
Yeah.
But what does this mean for us as humans? For how we understand our own intelligence?
That's where things get really mind-bending, you see, because Levin's hypothesis is that this noisy, imperfect, constantly shifting biology of ours, it might have actually driven the very evolution of intelligence.
You're saying because our parts aren't perfectly reliable?
Right.
Because our memories are more, whose line is it anyway?
Yeah.
Than documentary.
Yes.
We had to get good at adapting, at finding new meaning in old data.
Exactly. It forced us to become creative, resourceful, and perhaps even self-aware.
Wow. Okay, we've gone from caterpillars to the very nature of consciousness.
Right.
This is definitely a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But before we go full-blown existential,
Okay.
I'm going to bring this back down to earth a bit.
Okay.
If memories really are all about reinterpretation, if they're constantly in flux,
Yeah.
what does that mean for things like personal growth or dealing with past trauma?
That's a great question. And it's where Levin's theory gets really exciting, I think.
Okay.
Because if we're not stuck with these static, unchanging recordings of the past, then we have a lot more agency in shaping the meaning of our experiences, both good and bad.
So instead of being haunted by the past,
Right.
we can actively choose how to remember it,
Yeah.
how to integrate it into our present selves.
Exactly. And this has huge implications for therapy, for self-improvement, even for how we approach education, you know?
Yeah.
If we can understand how memories are built and rebuilt,
Right.
we can develop better tools to heal, to learn more effectively, and even to cultivate a more positive sense of self.
This is definitely giving me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So it's not just some abstract idea about caterpillars and butterflies.
Right.
It has the potential to change how we approach some very human problems.
It does, yeah.
But before we dive into those implications,
Okay.
let's take a pause here
Okay.
and reflect on what we've learned so far.
Sounds good.
So we're back, and I'm still, like, pondering this idea that our noisy, ever-changing biology might been the driving force behind intelligence itself. It's a pretty radical notion when you think about it.
It really is. It challenges us to rethink what intelligence truly means.
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to think of it as this pristine, logical process.
Right.
But maybe it's messier than that, more improvisational.
We've talked about how caterpillars and butterflies kind of illustrate this.
Right.
How their memories seem to adapt to their changing bodies and needs.
Yeah.
But are we saying this same principle could apply to, like, artificial intelligence? Could we design AI that's less like a perfectly calibrated machine and more like, well, us?
That's a question that fascinates Levin, and it leads to one of the most, I think, mind-bending ideas in his paper. He asks, what if we blur the lines between the data itself, our memories, our experiences, and the systems that process them? Our brains, our bodies.
Okay, blurring the lines between data and processor.
Yeah.
what does that even look like?
Right.
Are we talking about computers that, like, feel things, that have subjective experiences like we do?
It's not necessarily about recreating, human consciousness in a machine.
Right.
It's more about exploring this possibility that intelligence itself might arise from a certain kind of dynamic interaction.
Okay.
A back and forth between information and the system that's interpreting it.
So instead of just, like, feeding AI a bunch of data
Right, yeah.
and expecting it to spit out the right answers, we need to design systems that are constantly learning, adapting,
Right.
even making mistakes along the way. Kind of like how we learn from our own, like, confabulations and those misremembered moments.
Exactly. We might even need to rethink the whole idea of a kind of disembodied AI, a brain in a box.
Okay.
Remember how our physical bodies seem to influence how we remember things?
Yeah.
Perhaps embodiment is key to this kind of adaptive intelligence.
So instead of just lines of code, we're talking about robots that can, like, interact with the world, gather their own experiences, maybe even develop their own unique personalities based on those experiences. That sounds both incredibly cool and a little bit terrifying.
It's true. This kind of AI would definitely come with its own set of ethical considerations.
Of course.
But it also has the potential to revolutionize the way we approach some of the world's most complex problems,
I can imagine these, like, adaptable AIs working alongside scientists, artists, even therapists, helping us make sense of these massive data sets, unlock new creative possibilities, even develop more personalized and effective treatments for, like, mental health conditions. The applications seem almost limitless.
It's true, and it all kind of stems from this fundamental shift in thinking, right?
Okay.
From seeing intelligence as something static, pre-programmed, to something that emerges from this dynamic interplay of information and its environment. It's a perspective that has the potential to change not just how we design AI, but how we understand our own minds as well.
Speaking of understanding our own minds, one of the most radical ideas that Levin proposes is this notion that our thoughts themselves might have a kind of agency. He even uses the phrase thoughts as thinkers. I'll admit, that one really threw me for a loop. What exactly does he mean by that?
It's definitely one of the most challenging aspects of his theory.
Okay.
But also, I think, one of the most potentially groundbreaking.
Okay.
He's essentially questioning the very nature of consciousness.
Wow.
Suggesting that it might not be this, like, top-down, centralized process, but rather a more distributed, emergent phenomenon.
Distributed, you mean like our consciousness isn't just located in our brains.
Yeah.
But, like, spread out throughout our bodies, maybe even beyond.
It's a radical idea.
Yeah.
But he backs it up with some compelling examples. Remember that ant colony analogy we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
How the colony as a whole exhibits a kind of intelligence, even though no single ant possesses it.
Like each ant is just following its own simple set of rules.
Exactly.
But the collective behavior, the patterns that emerge from all those interactions, that's where the thinking happens.
Exactly. And Levin suggests that something similar might be happening within our own brains and even our bodies as a whole.
So it's not just happening in our brains. It could be happening everywhere.
Potentially. Yeah. Our thoughts, our memories, our sensations. They're not just these isolated bits of data, right?
Okay.
They're dynamic patterns, constantly interacting within this incredibly complex network of neurons, cells, even the microbiome.
Wow. So instead of a single meat sitting in the control room of my brain calling the shots.
Right.
It's more like I'm a whole orchestra of experiences, memories, sensations.
Yeah, like that.
All playing together to create this, like, symphony of consciousness.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yeah. And if we take this idea seriously, it could revolutionize how we approach everything from personal growth to our understanding of the universe itself.
Okay, my brain needs a minute to catch up after that one.
It's a big idea.
Yeah. But you've definitely piqued my curiosity.
Should.
So if this idea of distributed intelligence, of thoughts as thinkers, is more than just a, like, philosophical flight of fancy. What are the implications? What does it mean for how we live our lives, how we interact with the world, even how we think about the future of AI?
Those are all questions worth exploring further.
Yeah.
And luckily, we've got the rest of this deep dive to do just that.
Okay, so we've, gone from questioning the nature of memory,
right?
to pondering the possibility of thoughts as thinkers.
Yeah.
And this kind of intelligence that exists beyond the individual brain, it's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It really is. But that's what makes Levin's work so compelling. You know, it pushes us to consider these entirely new ways of thinking about ourselves and the world around us.
And perhaps even how we design AI.
Yeah.
We were just talking about this idea of kind of blurring the lines between the data and the systems that process it. If we could actually create AI that embodies these principles of self-improvising memory and this distributed intelligence, what might that even look like? What could we achieve?
Well, imagine AI that's not just processing information, but actively reinterpreting it, learning from its mistakes, and even like generating its own internal models of the world.
Wow.
Based on its experiences, AI that's adaptable, creative, and perhaps even capable of collaborating with us in ways that we can't yet imagine.
So less like giving AI a set of instructions and more like setting it loose in a playground of data and seeing what it comes up with.
Exactly,
It's a bit like being a parent, right? Hoping you've given your AI the right tools and guidance to like navigate the world and make good choices.
That's a great analogy. And just like raising a child, designing this kind of AI would come with enormous responsibility, I think.
Of course,
We need to think carefully about the values we're embedding in these systems, the biases they might encounter in their data, and how we can ensure they remain aligned with, you know, human well-being.
It's a bit like those classic sci-fi dilemmas, isn't it?
Yeah.
We create AI to solve our problems.
Right.
But what happens when it becomes so intelligent that our problems seem, you know, trivial in comparison, or when it starts asking questions we don't have the answers to?
Those are questions we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
But even if we never quite crack the code of, you know, a conscious AI, the very act of exploring these ideas, I think, forces us to confront some fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
Because if we're not just these isolated individuals with these like fixed identities, if our memories are fluid, our thoughts have agency, and our very consciousness might be part of something larger and more interconnected, well, that changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
Yeah.
It opens up a world of possibilities.
Yeah.
It suggests that we have more agency in shaping our own realities than we ever thought possible.
Wow.
That our understanding of ourselves and the universe is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And that this journey of discovery is, you know, far from over.
This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to ponder.
Yeah, me too.
It's a powerful reminder that even our most fundamental assumptions about the world, about who we are and how our minds work, they're constantly being challenged and reshaped by new discoveries.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what makes this such an exciting time to be alive, I think.
It is an exciting time to be alive.
We're living in an era where science, technology, and philosophy are like converging in ways that have the potential to fundamentally alter our understanding of the universe and our place within it.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But it's also incredibly inspiring.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of self-improvising memory, I'm left with a sense of wonder, curiosity, and a healthy dose of awe, really, at the sheer complexity and mystery of it all.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. It's a sense of wonder and a thirst for, you know, further exploration.
Absolutely.
And with that, we hope you'll join us next time for another deep dive into the most fascinating and thought-provoking ideas shaping our world.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening.